Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now on our 45th episode of 2024. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Five for Breakfast. This week, we will be in Albuquerque, New Mexico for our last regional Fiber Connect workshop of the year. We have our Fiber Broadband Association board meeting today and our regional event tomorrow, and we're expecting a capacity crowd. Planning's underway next year, and we will include San Antonio for one of our Fiber Connect regional events in February. We'll be in Philly in March. Then we'll have our big annual Fiber Connect 25 conference in Nashville, June 1 through 4. And then we'll be in Anchorage in July, Toronto in August, Spokane in September, Scottsdale in October, and Kansas City in November. And we'll be announcing the exact dates for each of the regionals as soon as we finalize all the contracts with the hotels and conference centers. So stay tuned for that. And then, after Albuquerque tomorrow, we will be wrapping up the year in the Florida Keys at our Premier member meeting on December 9th and 10th. So if you're a Premier member, I hope to see you there. That brings us to today's Fire for Breakfast. Our guest today is our good friend and top research partner, Mike Render, the CEO and principal analyst at RVA LLC. He'll be sharing his latest annual consumer survey, getting even more from fiber. Providers should amplify and augment the advantage. Before I formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce David Norris from the team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We appreciate it. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, please keep in mind, all participants are in listen-only mode today. To ask a question, please type it into the question box located within the control panel on the side of your screen in the upper right. We will host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's session. This presentation is also being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. And you can find that recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. Finally, at the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to do so. We appreciate your input. With that, I will pass things back over to Gary to once again introduce our guest and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, David, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, our guests were John Sullivan, the Chief Revenue Officer at DXTEL Fiber Home, Matt Fowler, the Executive Director at Dorify MLS, and Amanda Shearer of Adtran, who discussed the power and value of fiber in the home. If you missed that last week's session, you can go to our website and watch the replay. Today on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest, our good friend and top research partner, Mike Render of RVA, who's going to share his latest annual consumer study research, getting even more from fiber. Providers should amplify and augment the advantage. So Mike has been our research partner for over 2 decades. So he's most well known for the North American fiber deployment study that he shares with everybody in December, coming up next month, every year. And he also does a lot of incredible important research projects for Fiber Broadband Association. He's been around for over 30 years and is one of the top in his field. With that, welcome, Mike. And for our audience, please type in your questions as we go, and we'll work those into our discussion. With that, I will turn it over to Mike.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Today we're going to talk about the latest results of this consumer study. Next page, if you would. And, we've done this study since 2007. The FBA was forward thinking enough to think about getting input from consumers as well as trying to track deployment and so forth. And so we've done about 3,000 every year, sometimes 4,000 or more. Not all questions are asked each year. Sometimes we rotate things. Some questions are only asked every 3 or 4 years, and some are asked every year. And of course, new themes come up. We really focused on several things, but one focus this year is marketing and augmenting fiber. How do ISPs that are offering fiber get the most out of it? So in the next slide, we'll get into fiber advantages, and on to the next slide. Overall, this is very important. The last few years, we've asked what type of internet is the very best overall, no matter what you have today. And this is surveys of people that use DSL, wireless, everything else, just a random sample. But interestingly, 65% said fiber is best overall. And as you can see on the right-hand side, even that's true among people that have other methods. Now, of course, they won't all switch to fiber immediately. Some of them don't have fiber available. Some of them don't take the time and effort to switch immediately. But I think this portends very well for fiber's take rates overall in the coming years. Next slide. So one of the things we do during this survey is take actual speed tests. We ask questions about reliability and so forth. But the speed tests are really a random sample of users since it's a random group. We get their permission, take these speed tests, and you can see how upload speeds are far greater and they continue to get higher, download speeds as well. And these, of course, are speeds that are real world speeds. They're after Wi-Fi, they're depending on what tier people actually take and so forth. But in every single category here, download speeds, upload speeds, the cost per meg, taking the average download and upload and dividing it into the cost that people say they're paying. Far lower cost per megabit, far less outages, lower jitter, less variation. Median latency is lowest. That's the average time it takes an individual packet to get to you and back. So in every case, fiber really is better. There's really no question about it. And you could get into other things like sustainability, such as the recent paper that came out from the technology committee. Next slide. Here we're going to really focus on messaging, and we asked people how messages resonated. On the next slide, we're first asking people that recently changed to fiber from some other method or provider, what was most important? And we ranked some things, gave some choices, and this is the percent rating, very important. Reliability and download speed comes up number 1 and number 2. And in a similar question, not shown here, but we ask an open-ended question, why do you think fiber is better? And what's best about fiber? 74% first rated those top 2. They only gave a couple of reasons in that case. And so reliability, as much as download speed, should be emphasized here. Now, of course, some of the other ones below really fit in as well. Reliability and emergency. If you've got a storm and you need to get out, which do you feel more is reliable? Better upload speed, obviously very important in an area where fiber has a great advantage, so something else that can be emphasized. On the next slide, we actually gave some different messages about fiber and had people rank the top 2 or 3 that they would think most important, or just pick the top 2 or 3. Again, reliability and download speeds, number 1 and 2. But you can see some other ones that did fairly well. And on the right-hand side, you can see areas where you could, the provider could target messages at specific audiences. For example, reliability is especially important to those of older ages. You can see circled there in the upper right. An example down below is, fiber's best technology for gaming and virtual reality and so forth. That is most important to younger audiences, but it's obviously very important too. It's important too. Not everyone games and so forth, but in that group is very important. So finding niche markets and niche messages for certain groups is very important. Next slide. And here we're asking the consumers how they first heard. These are people that now have fiber. How they got their information. Where did you hear about fiber? And here you can see there's a mix of things that are, outgoing messaging from promotion, advertising, knocking on doors, to the other side of the coin, which is just word of mouth and so forth. So all these things are important. You can get some sense there from what you might want to concentrate on. But, it's very important in both cases. You've got direct control of the messages in some cases when you're giving an advertising piece or promotional piece. But it's also still best if that message is true, if it's backed up with what people hear from their friends and neighbors. And on the other hand, there's about 35% of the message that is out of your control as a provider. It's just coming from word of mouth or from, the builder or seller if you're buying a new home. It's the contractors installing it and so forth. So in this case, really having the best product is important, which fiber is, but also having things like great customer service and so forth will really come through those word of mouth and uncontrolled messages. Next slide. Fiber amplification. Going to the next slide, we can see one of the methods is that fiber's advantages can be amplified with more education. This is some work we did with a paper called "The Gigabit Fiber Can Add Billions to GDP." But we talked about the individual advantage as well. And a lot of people don't realize, a lot of people think, ironically, of internet as a digital thing. It's either good or it's a bad. It's 1 or 0. But in actuality, it's more of an analog component. There's a continuum of advantage. And at any given time, there's a range of speeds. When I started, it was 60 kilobits, and 1 megabit was the super speed. Now it's 60 megabits is a lower end speed, and 1 gigabit and beyond is the super speed. But what we see is because the size of the pipe means how much time is wasted getting that data down through you. And we've done some analysis based on open vault data and so forth, and seeing that the higher speed that you have, even real world speeds controlled by Wi-Fi, means less time wasted, significantly less time wasted, like an 18-minute per day difference, not focusing on the time spent streaming, but actually on interactive things between fiber and higher speed, often fiber, and lower speeds. And the other side, and on the other side, another implication of this is that if you're stuck with a small pipe, let's say 100 by 20, every year the data that's going to you per minute gets bigger. Developers are, as speeds go up, they're developing new apps and they're making existing apps more functional, more rich. And so the amount of data you've got to get down goes up every year. So as an example there, you can see the red line went from 5 minutes wasted for 100 by 20 in 2018 to over about 18 in 2024. And that's even considering you really get 100 by 20. If you're getting less because of Wi-Fi and so forth, that's even greater. So a lot of people don't realize this. A lot of people think in terms of, is it good enough or not good enough? But getting the very best and selling your customers on getting a gigabit capable product and actually taking a gigabit is an advantage for you and an advantage for them. Next slide. Localized services, if the provider can add things, and sometimes in partnership with others, for example, local home security with faster response, apps showing areas of congestion, snow plowing, age in place technology with maybe a personal response option where somebody can show up in partnership with somebody. And sometimes these localized services can even take advantage of the fiber attributes themselves, such as creating a local gaming network with high performance, low latency. Fiber has the lowest latency, but when you're competing against others very close, that low latency advantage is even equalized and accelerated. So, don't have all the answers, but there's some certain opportunities there for amplifying the advantage. Next slide. Here we're going to talk about augmenting the fiber, a couple more slides. If you go to the next one, Customer service is very important for fiber because if you've got the best product, you want to be able to complement that with the best service. And we ask about some things in the survey about, how important are certain things. Being able to talk to a real person was number one at 55%. Chat service below that, tight service windows. All these things can add to the experience that your consumer gets. On the right-hand side, you can see these differences cross-tabulated by age. And, personalized service, real person on the phone is especially important to those that are 55 plus. But even on the other end of the spectrum, 18 to 34, it's kind of a mix between getting chat and personalized somebody on the phone. So a lot of people are moving away from that. I think if you can add that and have a real knowledgeable person there, that can add a lot to the experience. Knowledgeable is a key word. We've all been to Best Buy and you say, which of these products do you think I should get? And he said, well, let me look, and looks in the back of the package. We want somebody that really is knowledgeable whenever possible on the first tier. Next slide. Here's showing some differences in satisfaction between tier 1, the largest providers, tier 3, tier 2, and tier 3. In this case, you can see some advantages for the tier 3s, especially at the top. Biggest differences in terms of customer service and trust. So those are some advantages that smaller providers can more easily hit, even though they have some disadvantages in terms of the wholesale costs they pay and so forth. But some advantages there. Not to say that tier 1s can't reach that by thinking locally and thinking customer service. Frontier is an example of somebody who had very poor service, but has really gone up more recently and helped result in their sale to Verizon recently, I'm sure. But customer service is very important. And that, in the last slide, I think in the next page, it shows how this plays out in terms of net promoter scores. And net promoter scores, of course, are taking, you ask the question, how likely are you to promote this service to a friend or a peer? And you take the top two, the very delighted people, the 9s and 10s, and you subtract the detractors, the 1 to 6, and you get a median score. Now, fiber does very well, 21. You can see that fixed wireless actually is on top right now. I think that's from our own study and hypothesis. That's because many of those people came from that category that they basically had unusable internet before. They're out in the middle of nowhere. They had satellite, Geosat. They had, very poor DSL. Now they're getting much better, even though we would call it low internet. They're delighted that they're able to use the internet actually. But down at the bottom there, you can see in terms of smaller providers, 38% net promoter score versus 16% for a tier 1 and 13% for a tier 2. So, again, I've said many times, I think providers, and many are really trying to do this, should be increasing that customer service and trust. We've seen in the last slide as well that trust is very important, not feeling like you're going to go through a bait and switch situation. What you say is gold, and tier 3 sometimes have an advantage there too. I've heard many times the CEO of these smaller organizations say, I have to put up with customers coming up to me in the grocery store and saying, what about this? So that might be forcing in that direction. But anyway, all to be said, everyone can get better customer service, but that's an important way to augment this product that is amazingly differentiated from many other types of internet. With that, Gary, I think I'll pass it back to any questions.
Hey, Mike. Well, this is really interesting. I appreciate it. So I do have a lot of questions. David, if we could flick it back to slide 12. I thought this was kind of interesting. And you were talking about the age demographics over to the right. I thought it was really interesting that that people my age are more concerned about um, reliability, and that the younger demographic, 18 to 34, seems to be more balanced. Is that
Hmm.
just why is there so much like this huge list of targeted messages seems to be any of those could resonate with the 18 to 34 versus only a
Yeah.
few messages resonate with the older crowd.
Yeah, I think from what I can tell, I think the younger group has more concerns. Plus, they may be feeling a little bit more uh, able to handle problems that come up and so forth. Um, I've got a 98-year-old cousin once removed who communicates with me almost daily, and she's been very concerned recently about having some reliability problems and things changing and so forth. So probably both more. We asked them to pick one or two things. Um, the younger group has more of a diverse interest of needs, I think, and the older group just may be more concerned about that safety and how do I deal with things when things aren't on all the time. I don't know all the answers, Gary, obviously, but it is interesting.
It also could be, our generation grew up with five nines reliability, the old public
Yeah.
telephone system, and the younger people grew up with cell phones and can you hear me now, and probably a little more used to
Yeah.
things. Don't they everything's
Yeah.
beta when you get applications, so maybe they're a little more
Right.
accustomed to things not being perfect.
Yeah.
Next slide. I always thought I was really interested. Here we are in the broadband world, and the best source of the way people like to get their information is through snail mail. Is that surprising?
Yeah, it is a little interesting, isn't it? But snail mail and people knocking on doors are still effective in terms of getting through to them. I think that's maybe part of the answer is, how do you message somebody online? There are certainly good people that are very knowledgeable in using digital ads and so forth. But I even find this in in market research. Um, it's very difficult to get people to respond to requests for a survey via online, and sometimes traditional methods still work well in that regard. And it's not to say that that's where they're going to get their ultimate information, but sometimes just breaking through that first time, that can be helpful. But it is interesting.
Yeah, I always think it's ironic when I get a piece of mail from Google. Like when you think
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
like the ultimate online company still sends stuff
Right.
out
Right.
snail
Right.
mail. Go to the slide 15, David, and can you talk a little bit about the importance of understanding peak rates versus average rates? Because I think people get confused of, oh, I don't need all that bandwidth for Netflix or doing email or things like that. But really, peak rate is really kind of the key, I guess.
Yeah. People tend to think, and even if you if you Google, is a gigabit really necessary? You get a lot of responses that say, well, not necessarily. If you're not doing, very exotic things or dealing with large files all the time, maybe you don't really need a gigabit. But my hypothesis is, and I actually partly came to this conclusion after thinking it through, after finally getting fiber myself, it really is worth for most people to get that higher bandwidth because it does waste a lot of time, and we don't think about it all the time. It's 2 seconds here, 20 seconds there, um, that we're wasting, but it adds up uh, over time, and it is significant. And most of us value our time. If there's certain people that may not know what to do with their time, and it doesn't matter. But for most of us, time is gold, and this is where the highest speed that is relatively affordable is really what people should be getting, in my opinion, after going through this analysis.
Great. The other thing I thought was interesting is, other applications outside of just normal um, browsing and so forth is like, for instance, when we were in Iowa for our regional conference, we had the experts on precision agriculture, and the researchers are saying that in precision ag, every 2 years they're creating as much data as has been created throughout history.
Yeah,
And so basically every 2 years, the amount of his data throughout history is doubling.
yeah,
Um, so I would think that as we start adding more things to the baseline of
yeah.
capacity would be,
Yeah, and that's what we saw too in the analysis, is that every year the data increases, and it's partly new applications. You can think virtual reality or whatever, but it's partly just existing applications. A website, the developers know that users are only going to wait 3 minutes or 3 seconds at most for a page to load, so they limit. So over time, as that speed has gone up, they're gradually doing more and more video. I have gigabit. I see full video websites and things. The whole thing is video. So even existing applications are going up and getting more capable. Not to mention all the new applications over time.
well, it's funny. I just had to get a new MacBook, and I thought because I ran out of disk space, and I'm like, I use cloud
Yeah,
storage. How is that
yeah.
possible? And it turns out the Mac operating system is now so large that it takes
Mhm.
up more than I have space on
Right,
in a 4-year-old
right.
Power book, Power Mac, MacBook. So it's crazy. On slide 20, so one of the things that kind of I thought was odd is that your findings on Net Promoter Score is that tier two providers are lower. I mean, I can see why tier three providers are the best because they're very community. Everybody knows everybody, and I can see why tier ones, there's kind of love-hate relationships with big companies. But why is tier two? You would think they'd be somewhere in between. Why is that? What's the
Mhm.
shortfall there?
Yeah, I can't answer that. And of course, it's fairly close. You might say it's within the margin of error between tier ones and tier twos, and the sample size is small for tier twos. So I can't say with a surety that it's really lower, but um, and I don't know the answer to that either. But you do have some tier one providers who have been really trying hard recently to
Mhm.
improve their experience and net promoter scores. I don't have the answer to that, Gary, but
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that what we had is a lot of tier twos took the Connect America FCC funding, and so they built out all that DSL, and so there could be a disappointment from their installed base, but all those tier twos now are restructured and highly committed to putting more fiber. So I would think that they'd
Mhm.
be bubbling up, that those communities
Right.
be happy now getting all that fiber. But anyway, very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, this is great stuff. Really appreciate all the hard work that you always and interesting studies that you provide our industry. And I look forward to seeing you down in the Keys at our premier member meeting when you unveil the latest deployment numbers for fiber. I'm assuming we're going to have another record year on deployment. Any previews you want to give us or anything?
Well, I'm assuming it's going to be up somewhat. We don't have any exact numbers, so I don't want to tip any hands there, but we'll have some great information on deployment and some other good observations, I think, as well.
All right. Well, thanks again, Mike. Really appreciate your research and all your efforts to help advance the fiber industry. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today and look forward to getting back together next Wednesday. We'll be getting together with our good friend Mark Bridger from Continuum Capital to discuss his latest research on the national and state level workforce uh, needs for fiber deployment. So, Mark had put together what the different job codes and how many people that we need to develop and to train for each of those job codes on a state-by-state level and then aggregate it up to the whole national level. So it's a really important study, and I hope you guys join us to hear what Mark has to say. Thanks again, Mike. We'll see you guys next time.
Great.